Welcome to Simplified UPSC by PPP, where we listen, learn, and grow together. Detailed lecture notes in English and Hindi, plus practice questions for prelims and mains, only on our Telegram channel. Link in description. Like and subscribe for more.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into the foundations, the absolute basics of environment and ecology. Our mission here isn't just a quick overview. We're going deep, meticulously unpacking every single definition, every concept, every relationship from that crucial first chapter on environment and ecology fundamentals.
That's exactly right. Think of this as learning the essential grammar, the vocabulary you absolutely need to properly discuss everything else, conservation, climate change, you name it. If you're aiming for those high-stakes exams, or honestly, even if you just want a really solid understanding, getting these basic terms absolutely nailed down is what's non-negotiable. We're aiming for comprehensive detail, sticking strictly to the source material.
Yeah, that precision is key, isn't it? Because if we gloss over these fundamentals, then trying to analyze the really complex stuff later, like biodiversity loss or different mitigation strategies, it just falls apart. So let's start right at the beginning. The word environment, we use it all the time, but in a strict ecological sense, what is it? What are its pieces?
Okay, so the environment really at its core is just everything that surrounds a living thing, an organism. But it's not just a random collection of stuff, it's a system, a holistic one where all the components are interacting, they depend on each other. And we generally split these components into two big categories, the non-living and the living.
Okay, let's tackle the non-living first, what the textbook calls the abiotic components. I mean, things like air and water seem obvious, but what specific physical forces and substances does the source list as being really fundamental here?
Right, the source is very specific. It lists energy, primarily solar energy, of course, then radiation, which is linked to that, temperature, water, obviously crucial, fire, gravity, and soil.
That's interesting. Energy, temperature, water, soil, those make immediate sense as things that limit life. But fire, gravity, how should we think about those as explicit environmental components in the same way?
That's a really good question because they operate a bit differently. When the source lists them, it's highlighting the fundamental conditions and sometimes the stresses that shape where and how life exists. Gravity, for instance, is this constant force. It dictates morphology, how things are shaped, how they grow upwards, how animals move. It literally sets the vertical boundaries. Fire, on the other hand, isn't constant, but it's a powerful cyclical factor in many ecosystems. Think grasslands, some forests. It acts as this natural disturbance, clearing out old growth, releasing nutrients, basically resetting the stage and influencing which species thrive. So yeah, it's a fundamental non-living factor shaping the environment.
Okay, that clarifies it. So the abiotic components are like the physical stage, the setting, and also maybe some of the recurring events or rules of that stage. Now, what about the biotic components, the living actors on this stage? How does the source categorize them?
The biotic components are grouped based on what they do in the ecosystem, specifically how energy flows. So you've got three main functional groups. First, plants. These are the producers. They're the base. They capture solar energy, turn it into chemical energy through photosynthesis. They literally produce the food.
Right, the foundation of the food chain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Second, you have animals. These are the consumers. They can't make their own food, so they get their energy by eating others, either the plants or other animals. And third, a group that's often overlooked but is absolutely vital, the decomposers. These are mainly things like bacteria and fungi.
Why are they so critical?
Because they break down all the dead stuff, dead plants, dead animals, waste products. They decompose it, returning essential nutrients back into the soil and water. Those nutrients are then available for the producers, the plants, to use again. Without decomposers, nutrients would get locked up and the whole system would just grind to a halt. They're the recyclers.
So the environment is really this interplay between the abiotic stage and the biotic players, producers, consumers, decomposers.
Got it. And the science that studies all these complex interactions, that's ecology. What's the formal definition given?
Ecology. It's defined as the scientific study of the interrelations, the relationships between living organisms, that could be individuals, groups, whole communities, and their environment, both the living and non-living parts. And the name itself comes from Greek oikos, meaning house or place to live. So ecology is literally the study of our planetary house and how everything in it interacts.
If the environment is the house, ecology is studying the wiring, the plumbing, the relationships inside. Makes sense. Is there like a single big idea, an overarching principle that guides ecology? Yes, the core principle, really, is interdependence. The survival, the functioning of any ecosystem hinges entirely on these connections. Every organism is linked, to others and to the physical environment. If you mess with the abiotic factors, too much heat, not enough water, change the soil chemistry, you inevitably disrupt the biotic interactions. It threatens the stability, sometimes the very existence of that whole ecological unit. Everything is connected.
Okay, that sets the stage beautifully. We know what the environment is, what ecology studies. Now let's talk about how life is structured within that environment. The source lays out this hierarchy, right? Like levels of organization.
Exactly. It's a way to understand the increasing complexity. There are 6 main levels described, starting from the simplest functional unit,
And that simplest unit is?
the individual, or sometimes just called the organism.
Right.
This is just one single living being, one plant, one animal, one bacterium. This is the level where natural selection really operates directly, where you see adaptations playing out, where that single entity has to cope with its immediate surroundings to survive and reproduce.
Okay, one step up from the individual. What happens when you have more than one?
Then you get a population. Now, the definition here is specific. It's not just any group of individuals. It has to be a group of individuals of the same species. And critically, they have to be living together in a particular defined geographical area and capable of interbreeding. So a population is about dynamics within a species, how many there are, how they compete with each other, how they reproduce.
Right, same species, same area. But things get really interesting when different species start interacting. That takes us to the next level.
Yes, that's the community, or more specifically, the biotic community. This is defined as an assembly of populations of different species that are living together and interacting in a particular area. And they have to interact because, as we said, interdependence is key. Animals need plants for food or maybe shelter. Plants might need animals for pollination or to spread their seeds. Everyone relies on those decomposers eventually. It's this web of interactions that defines the community.
So the community is all about these interactions between different species living in the same place. The source also mentioned communities are often named after something specific.
That's right. Very often, a community is named after the dominant type of plant life, or sometimes a key physical feature. So you might talk about a grassland community. That doesn't mean it's only grass, obviously. It includes all the interacting animals, insects, microbes, maybe some shrubs or scattered trees, but the grasses are the dominant feature defining that community structure.
Makes sense. Now, when we take that biotic community, all the living stuff, and combine it explicitly with the abiotic components, the non-living environment they're interacting with, what level do we reach?
That's the ecosystem. This is a really fundamental unit in ecology. It's defined as the biological community plus the non-living environment, all interacting together as a functional system. The key thing about the ecosystem level is that this is where we really focus on energy flow and nutrient cycling. How does energy move from the sun through producers to consumers, and how do nutrients get cycled round and round by decomposers? That's ecosystem analysis.
And the source breaks ecosystems down into major types, right? Terrestrial and aquatic.
Yep. Broadly, you have land-based terrestrial ecosystems and water-based aquatic ecosystems. Within aquatic, there's a further important split. You have freshwater ecosystems, and those are divided into Lotic, meaning flowing water, like rivers and streams, and Lentic, meaning still or standing water, like lakes, ponds, swamps, bogs.
Lotic and lentic, why is that distinction so important ecologically?
Because the physical conditions are vastly different. In a Lotic system, the current is dominant. Organisms need adaptation to avoid being swept away. They might need to anchor themselves or be strong swimmers. Oxygen is usually plentiful because of the churning water. In a lentic system, flow is minimal. Things like light penetration, temperature layers, stratification become much more critical. Oxygen levels can vary hugely with depth and temperature. The challenges for life are completely different.
Got it. And besides freshwater, what are the other major aquatic types?
Then you have marine ecosystems, the oceans and seas, huge, covering most of the planet, and defined by their high salt content, usually around 35 parts per thousand salinity. And finally, estuarine ecosystems. These are really interesting dynamic zones where fresh water from rivers meets and mixes with salt water from the ocean. Think river mouths, coastal bays, tidal marshes, mangroves. They're often incredibly productive because they get inputs from both fresh and saltwater systems.
Okay, so individual, population, community, ecosystem. We're scaling up. What's the next level, even bigger than an ecosystem?
That would be the biome. Now we're talking large geographical areas, regional scale. A biome is defined as a large regional or subcontinental ecological unit. Its character, especially its vegetation, is primarily determined by the climate. And the two most important climatic factors, according to the source, that define a biome's boundaries and character are temperature and precipitation. These really dictate what kind of major plant life can dominate forests, grasslands, deserts, etc.
So climate is king at the biome level. To make this concrete, the source uses the tundra as a key example. Can you lay out the specific defining features of the tundra biome based on the text?
Sure. The tundra is described as the biome found at the northernmost and southernmost latitudes, right next to the ice caps, and also at very high altitudes on mountains above the tree line. Its defining characteristic is that it's basically devoid of trees. You might find some stunted shrubs in the more southerly parts, but mostly trees can't survive the cold and the permafrost. The ground vegetation, the flora, is sparse. It's dominated by things that can handle extreme cold and short growing seasons: lichen, mosses, and sedges.
And the animals. What kind of fauna does the source list as typical for the tundra?
The animals have to be highly adapted to the severe cold. The source specifically mentions reindeer, or caribou in North America, Arctic fox, polar bear, snowy owl, lemming, Arctic hare, and ptarmigan. A really crucial point the source makes is the almost complete absence of reptiles and amphibians. It's simply too cold for them. They can't regulate their body temperature effectively in those conditions.
That absence is a key identifier. Any specific adaptations mentioned for the mammals?
Yeah, as a classic example, tundra mammals often exhibit large body size and have small extremities like short tails and small ears. This reduces the surface area relative to volume, which helps minimize heat loss to the frigid environment. It's a structural adaptation for survival.
That's a great example of adaptation, which we'll get into more detail on shortly. Okay, we've gone from individual all the way up to biome. Is there one final, all-encompassing level?
Yes, the largest scale of ecological organization is the biosphere. This is essentially the sum total of all ecosystems on Earth. It's the global ecological system that integrates all living beings and their relationships with each other, and with the elements of the lithosphere, the land, the hydrosphere, the water, and the atmosphere, the air. It's basically the zone of life on planet Earth.
Wow, okay. So that's the hierarchy, the structure. Now let's shift gears and look at the processes and principles that make these systems work. How organisms actually survive and interact. Let's start with maybe the most fundamental concept, adaptation.
Adaptation is absolutely central. It's defined as any feature of an organism, whether it's structural, physiological, or behavioral, that helps it survive and reproduce more successfully in its particular environment. It's the result of evolution by natural selection.
We already touched upon it with the tundra animals. Can we use the source examples to really illustrate the different types of adaptation, structural, physiological, behavioral?
Definitely. The tundra examples are perfect for structural and physiological. We mentioned the structural adaptation in mammals. Large body, small ear tail to conserve heat. For tundra plants, the source mentions structural and physiological adaptations, like having a thick cuticle on their leaves or dense covering of epidermal hair. These features help protect against the cold and also reduce water loss, which can be critical even in cold environments if water is frozen.
Okay, so those are physical changes. What about behavioral? Does the source give examples? Checking outline source might not detail behavioral explicitly, focus on structural, physiological from tundra text.
The source text we're focusing on for this chapter really emphasizes the structural and physiological aspects, especially using the tundra examples. While behavioral adaptations are crucial in ecology, like migration, hibernation, specific foraging techniques, the provided material drills down on those physical traits as key examples of adaptation.
Got it. So these adaptations arise because there's variation within a population, right? Some individuals are just slightly different. How does the source talk about variation and the process that leads to new species? Speciation.
Variation refers to the differences that naturally exist among individuals within any population. Different sizes, colors, tolerances, behaviors. It's the raw material.
Yeah.
The source explains that environmental pressures like the cold in the tundra or drought in a desert act on this variation. Individuals with variations that make them better suited to the conditions are more likely to survive and reproduce. Over long periods, this process, natural selection, can lead to speciation. That's the evolutionary process, where new biological species arise. Essentially, a population changes so much, accumulates so many different adaptations, that it becomes reproductively isolated from its ancestral population. It can no longer interbreed successfully. A new species is born.
So variation is the fuel, selection is the engine, and speciation is the outcome over time. Now, within an individual organism, amidst all this external change and pressure, there's a key process for maintaining internal balance, right?
Yes, absolutely crucial. Homeostasis. This is defined as the ability or tendency of an organism or even a cell to maintain a stable, relatively constant internal environment despite changes in the external environment. Think of it like your body maintaining a constant temperature around 98.6 degrees, 37 degrees C, regardless of whether it's hot or cold outside. This internal stability is vital for enzymes and metabolic processes to function correctly.
Okay, internal stability, homeostasis. Now let's look at boundaries and roles outside the organism. The source talks about ecotones. What exactly is an ecotone?
An ecotone is defined as a zone of junction or transition area between two or more different ecosystems. Think of where a forest meets a grassland, or where a river flows into the sea, creating an estuary, or the edge of a lake. These zones are often described as areas of environmental tension because conditions are shifting from one type to another.
Tension sounds like it might be, well, stressful for organisms. But what does the source say about the species found in ecotones?
It's actually often the opposite of stressful, in a way. Ecotones typically have characteristics of both adjacent ecosystems, so you'll often find species there that belong to each of the bordering communities. But interestingly, ecotones can also sometimes host unique species that are specifically adapted to the particular conditions of that transitional zone itself.
And this leads to a really important ecological principle, doesn't it? The edge effect. What is that, and why does it usually mean more biodiversity, not less?
Right, the edge effect is a key consequence of having ecotones. It refers to the observed tendency for both the variety number of species and the density number of individuals of life to be greater in the ecotone than in either of the adjoining ecosystems. The reason for this increased biodiversity is basically access. Organisms living in the edge zone can potentially draw resources from both adjacent habitats. A bird might find nesting sites in the forest edge, but abundant insect food in the adjacent meadow. This overlap of resources supports more species and often more individuals of those species.
So edges are often hotspots. Now, within any of these areas, ecotone or core habitat, an organism has its place. We need to distinguish habitat from ecological niche. This distinction comes up a lot.
It does. And it's vital. The habitat is simply the physical place where an organism lives. It's its address. The bottom of a pond, the canopy of a rainforest, the soil under a log. The ecological niche, however, is much broader. It describes the organism's functional role within that ecosystem. It's not just where it lives, but what it does, what it eats, what eats it when it's active, how it reproduces, its tolerance ranges for temperature, moisture, etc. The classic analogy, which the source likely implies, is habitat is the address, niche is the profession or the role.
Address versus profession. I like that. Okay, so organisms occupy niches, but they don't exist in isolation. They interact. The source lays out several types of direct biotic interactions. Can you walk us through them using that plus scenario notation to show the effect on each species?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This system helps clarify the outcomes. The source details these key interactions. 1, mutualism, plus plus. Both species involved in the interaction benefit. The classic example provided is pollination. The pollinator, like a bee, gets food, nectar, or pollen, plus, and the plant gets its pollen transferred, enabling reproduction, plus. It's a win-win.
Okay, both benefit. What's next?
2, commensalism, plus 0. Here, one species benefits, plus, while the other is essentially unaffected, 0. It derives some advantage, but the host species doesn't gain or lose anything significant from the interaction. Finding perfect examples where the host is truly unaffected can be tricky, but the concept is one benefits, one is neutral.
So a plus and a 0? What about a minus and a 0?
3, amensalism, monomelo 0. This is the opposite in a way. One species is harmed or inhibited, while the other species isn't affected at all, 0. The source gives a great example, a large tree casting shade on a small plant growing underneath. The tree doesn't care, but the small plant's growth is stunted due to lack of sunlight.
That's a clear one. What about when both are negatively affected?
4, competition. This happens when 2 or more species require the same limited resource like food, water, nesting sites, sunlight. Because the resource is limited, both species are negatively impacted. Their growth, survival, or reproduction might be reduced compared to if they weren't competing. It's a lose-lose. The one might lose more than the other.
Makes sense. Now, for the interactions where one benefits and the other is harmed, there are 2 main types, right?
Yes, both are plus Mike, but the mechanism is different. 5, predation plus Mike. This is where one species, the predator plus hunts, kills, and eats another species, the prey. It's a direct, usually immediate transfer of energy. The source example is simple. One fish catching and eating another fish.
Okay, predator eats prey. What's the other plus Mike interaction?
6, parasitism plus Swink. Here, one organism, the parasite plus, lives on or inside another organism, the host, and obtains nutrients from it. The host is harmed because it's losing resources. But unlike predation, the parasite usually doesn't kill its host, at least not quickly. It benefits from keeping the host alive. The textbook example is very clear. A tick feeding on the blood of a host animal. The tick benefits, plus the host loses blood and might get diseases.
That distinction is really important. Predation is kill and consume. Parasitism is drain resources, often long-term. Is there a final interaction type?
7. Mutualism. This is the theoretical interaction where two species live in the same area but have absolutely no measurable effect on each other. Their niches are so different or resources so abundant that they just don't interact in any significant way. Ecologically, true mutualism is often considered rare or hard to prove, but it completes the spectrum of possible interactions.
Got it. Mutualism, Commensalism, Amensalism, Competition, Predation, Parasitism, Neutralism. That covers the direct relationships. Okay, we've looked at the structure and the interactions. Now let's circle back to those ecological factors, the abiotic components we listed earlier, but this time focusing on how they act as constraints, as limiting factors that shape where and how organisms can live. Let's start with the big one, the sun.
Right. The sun's role is described as the primary, the ultimate source of energy for almost every ecosystem on Earth. It's fundamental for two main reasons. First, its light energy drives photosynthesis by the producers, plants, algae, some bacteria, which forms the base of nearly all food chains. No sun, essentially no food. Second, solar energy drives climate and weather patterns, evaporation, the water cycle, all the large-scale physical processes that shape the environment.
Okay, energy source number one. Next, water. We know it's essential, but how does it act as a limiting factor?
Water is fundamental for all life, as we know it. It's the solvent for biochemical reactions, it transports nutrients, it helps regulate temperature. Because it's so essential, its availability is often the critical limiting factor, especially in terrestrial environments. Whether it's a desert, grassland, or even a forest during a dry season, the amount and timing of rainfall dictates what can grow, how much can grow, and which animals can survive there. It's also crucial in aquatic systems, of course, in terms of salinity, flow, etc.
And the scarcity of water, particularly on land, forces plants to evolve specific ways to cope. The source mentions xerophytes. Can you detail their adaptations?
Yes. Xerophytes are plants specifically adapted to survive in very dry, arid conditions. Their challenge is minimizing water loss, primarily through transpiration from their leaves. The source highlights key strategies. 1. Developing hard and/or waxy leaves. This thick, impermeable surface reduces evaporation. 2. Having very small leaves or even no leaves at all. This drastically cuts down the surface area available for water loss. 3. In some cases, replacing leaves entirely with thorns. This not only deters herbivores, but eliminates the main site of transpiration. Photosynthesis might then occur in the stem, like in many cacti. These are all ways to conserve precious water.
Really specific adaptations. Okay, moving on to temperature. How does it influence life at the organism level?
Temperature is huge because it directly controls the rate of metabolic reactions. Enzymes, which drive almost all biochemical processes, have optimal temperature ranges. Too cold, reactions slow down too much. Too hot, enzymes can denature, lose their shape, and stop working altogether. So an organism's ability to function, grow, and reproduce is tightly linked to the temperature of its environment. This dictates geographic distribution patterns more than almost anything else.
And this leads to those two key terms describing temperature tolerance, right?
Exactly. Organisms are broadly categorized based on their tolerance range. Stenothermal organisms can only tolerate a very narrow range of temperatures. They're specialists, often found in very stable environments like the deep ocean or tropical regions. Euthermal organisms, on the other hand, can tolerate a wide range of temperatures. They're generalists, able to survive in environments with significant temperature fluctuations like temperate zones with distinct seasons. This distinction is becoming incredibly important as we think about climate change impacts.
Definitely. And you mentioned earlier temperature has a really significant, maybe counterintuitive effect in water, especially regarding oxygen. Let's nail that down.
Yes, this is a critical point for aquatic ecosystems. Warm water holds less dissolved oxygen than cold water. That's just physics. Gas solubility decreases as temperature rises. At the same time, warmer temperatures increase the metabolic rate of aquatic organisms, including the decomposers, bacteria that consume oxygen as they break down organic matter. So you get a double whammy in warm water, less oxygen available to begin with, and faster consumption of what is there. This can easily lead to low oxygen hypoxic or no oxygen anoxic conditions, which are very stressful or lethal for fish and many other aquatic creatures.
Less supply, more demand. That's a bad combination. Okay, next limiting factor. Light, obviously needed for photosynthesis, but how else does it limit or influence life, especially in water?
Light has that crucial role in providing energy for photosynthesis, so it directly limits primary productivity, especially in dense forests or deep water. It also plays a role in regulating biological rhythms, like flowering in plants, photoperiodism, or activity patterns in animals. In aquatic ecosystems, light penetration is a major limiting factor. Sunlight can only reach a certain depth. The upper layer where there's enough light for photosynthesis to exceed respiration is called the photic zone or euphotic zone. This depth determines where phytoplankton, the base of most aquatic food webs, can live and thrive. Below that, in the euphotic zone, there's not enough light for net primary production.
So light essentially dictates the depth of the productive layer in water bodies. Finally, let's look at soil. We know it's important for plants, but what does the source say about its composition and role as an ecological factor?
Soil is described as a fundamental natural resource, the foundation for most terrestrial life. It's not just dirt, it's a complex mixture. The source lists its main components as minerals derived from weathered rock, organic matter from decaying plants and animals, air, and water. The relative proportions of these determine the soil's properties.
And the source also categorizes different soil types.
Yes, it provides a list based on chemical or physical characteristics, highlighting how diverse soils can be. It mentions saline soils, high in salts, sodic soils, high in sodium, often alkaline, acid soils, low pH, sandy soils, coarse texture, drain quickly, alkaline soils, high pH, sometimes mentioning calcareous soils with calcium carbonate, and terms like alphesols, which is a more technical soil classification term referring to moderately leached soils often found under forests. Each type supports different kinds of vegetation.
And what shapes the soil itself? How does a particular soil profile the different layers you see develop?
Soil formation, or pedogenesis, is influenced by several factors. The source mentions topography, things like the slope of the land, drainage patterns, elevation, even which direction the slope faces aspect affects temperature and moisture. And critically, living organisms are major players. Plant roots break up soil and add organic matter when they die. Earthworms, insects, bacteria, and fungi constantly churn the soil, decompose organic material, and cycle nutrients. Climate, temperature and rainfall, and the parent rock material are also fundamental drivers over long time scales.
Okay, that's a really thorough walkthrough of the key definitions, the levels of organization, the core principles like adaptation and niche, and the limiting factors. Fantastic detail. Now, let's switch gears slightly and try to apply this almost like a quick quiz section to really solidify some of the trickier concepts framed like potential exam statements. Let's call it our Chapter 1 recap and PYQ analysis segment. I'll pose a statement and you tell me if it's correct based strictly on our source material for this chapter.
Sounds good. Let's test that retention. Fire away.
All right, statement 1. Ecotones, the transition zones between ecosystems, are characterized by intense environmental stress, leading to consistently lower species diversity compared to the more stable adjacent community.
Okay, that statement is definitively incorrect. While the first part is right, ecotones are transition zones and can have unique environmental pressures, zone of tension. The conclusion about diversity is wrong according to the edge effect. The edge effect specifically describes the tendency for ecotones to exhibit greater species diversity and density than the adjoining habitats, precisely because organisms can utilize resources from both. So, higher diversity, not lower.
Perfect. So that hinges on remembering the edge effect counters the simple tension idea. Okay, statement 2. The interaction where a tick attaches to a dog and feeds on its blood is an example of Amensalism because the tick benefits while the dog is unaffected.
That's also incorrect. Two major errors there. First, the description itself, one benefits, one is harmed, loses blood, potential disease, fits the definition of parasitism, plus, not Amensalism. Second, Amensalism is defined as where one is harmed and the other is unaffected, like the tree shading the small plant. And the tick dog example is the classic illustration of parasitism given in many texts, including the source context.
Right, getting the plus S0 combination and the definition correct is crucial. Okay, final hypothetical statement. In aquatic ecosystems, increased water temperature generally enhances the availability of dissolved oxygen for fish as metabolic processes speed up.
That one is dangerously incorrect.
Yeah.
It gets the cause and effect completely backward. As we discussed under limiting factors, warmer water physically holds less dissolved oxygen. Gases are less soluble at higher temperatures. And while metabolic rates do speed up, including for decomposers, this actually increases the rate at which the limited oxygen supply is consumed. So warmer water leads to less available oxygen, which is often detrimental to fish.
Excellent. That really highlights how understanding the underlying mechanisms like gas solubility is essential, not just memorizing terms. This kind of detailed checking is exactly what's needed.
So to wrap up the key takeaways from this foundational chapter, let's hit the high points, especially for quick recall, the prelims pointers, if you will.
Go for it. What are the absolute must-remember terms and examples?
Okay, rapid fire. Environment components. Remember, abiotic includes energy, radiation, temp, water, fire, gravity, soil. Biotic is strutting. Producers, consumers, decomposers. Ecology, study of interrelations. Oiko's house. Hierarchy. Individual, population, same species. Community, dispecies. Ecosystem, biotic plus biome, climate-driven. Biosphere, global. Ecotone, transition zone. Key concept, edge effect, higher biodiversity. Niche, functional role profession versus habitat, acreaceous. Crucial distinction, adaptation, structural, physiological, behavioral trait for survival reproduction. 200 examples. Thick, cuticle, large, bodies, mole, ears, homeostasis, maintaining internal stability, biotic interactions, know the science. Mutualism plus plus, Commensalism plus 0, Amensalism plus 0, competition, predation plus mate kill it, parasitism plus mate train live on. Example, tick host, parasitism, limiting factors. Warm water dissolved O2, Xerophytes adaptations to drought, waxy tiny thorny leaves, photic zone equals light limits, depth of productivity.
That's a great checklist. Now, looking beyond just recalling facts, how does understanding these fundamentals connect to bigger picture issues, maybe thinking towards mains analysis?
Well, these basics are the building blocks for analyzing almost any environmental issue. Understanding limiting factors like water availability or temperature tolerance is essential when you analyze human impacts, things like groundwater depletion, thermal pollution from power plants, or the effects of climate change on species distribution, relevant for GS Paper 3. You need to know what ecological thresholds are being crossed.
And what about conservation?
The principles of community interactions in niche are fundamental to conservation. Realizing that ecosystems rely on complex webs like mutualism, pollinators and plants, highlights why biodiversity is so important. It's not just about saving individual species, it's about maintaining the functional roles, the niches, and the interactions that keep the entire system healthy and resilient. Lose a key pollinator, and entire plant communities could suffer. That feeds directly into arguments for biodiversity conservation.
So understanding the rules of the house helps us see how human actions break those rules, and why protecting all the parts is crucial for keeping the house standing.
Precisely. And maybe a final thought to leave our listeners with, connecting back to that idea of biomes being defined by temperature and precipitation. Given that climate change is demonstrably altering global temperature patterns and making precipitation more variable and extreme, what does this inevitably mean for the established boundaries of the world's biomes? How fast can those boundaries shift? And perhaps more critically, can the species specifically adapted to the current conditions within those biomes, like the highly specialized life in the tundra, adapt or migrate quickly enough to keep pace with their environment literally changing around them? That's the real-world application of these fundamental principles playing out right now.
A powerful and slightly sobering thought to end on. It really emphasizes that mastering these basics isn't just academic, it's critical for understanding the huge environmental challenges we face. This has been an incredibly thorough deep dive. Thank you for breaking it down with such clarity and detail.
It was my pleasure. Getting these foundations right is absolutely key for everything that follows in environmental studies.
And thank you, our listeners, for joining us on this deep dive. We genuinely hope this detailed exploration of Chapter 1 has given you that solid conceptual footing you need. We'll catch you on the next one.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Telegram and Instagram. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.